The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL. You are Locked On Vikings Postcast, part of Locked On Minnesota on the Locked On Podcast Network.
I'll start this the way that Luke always starts it, which is just give me your very first rapid reaction headline thought. Ron, we'll start with you.
It looked like it was about to be a blowout. I'm not gonna lie. It got a little boring at one point when it was, I think it was like 20-3 or something like that. And so around that time, I was like, oh, this is about to go bad. Like America, they kept flashing America's game of the week in the stadium. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is not America's game of the week. And then like the script writers, it felt like they were like, hey guys, we're going to let you win, but can you make it a little bit more interesting? Because we have a lot of fans watching this game and we made this the game of the week. And so the script started to play itself out. But, the Vikings offense got a little stagnant. Aaron Jones went out. I don't know, there was no anything about why he was out, if it was just resting because the game was out of hand at one point. Maybe I don't know. We'll see, Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever we get the injury report of what possibly could be wrong with Aaron Jones. Or was it literally just, hey, Akers, I felt like he was a better guy for the situations we had coming up, and they went that way. But my immediate was started out a complete blowout, came back to the pack, but the Vikings offense showing that they could put up points on this Packers defense, and the Vikings defense for most of the game shutting down Jordan Love, this is a team that had scored, and they almost scored. I mean, they got 25 points. They had scored over 30 points in the last 3 games. So the way they handled them, the way they, took care of business, for me, it was cool to see Brian Flores, dialing up some different looks too. Cause I don't know if it was just, let me put this on film so the Lions have more to deal with this week. But it was cool to see some, just the 2 down, 3 or 4 guys roaming around. And then of course Dallas Turner getting another sack, so that's always good.
Yeah, my first thought is the Vikings are doing it, man. This is awesome.
They're doing the thing.
They're doing the thing, right? A 14 team. Obviously, many people consider the Packers to be a pretty good team. The data suggests that they are a good team. The Vikings, for the most part, were beating the crap out of a very good team for most of the game. Obviously, what had happened at the end, not that great. Vikings do need to tighten down on that. What was interesting is I thought, hey, maybe they're kind of turning around because they did tighten down at the end of the half, right? When they stopped the Packers from driving.
They recovered the muff punt this time. That's improvement.
Right. Yeah. Right.
This is the exact same game. It's insane.
It's crazy, right? And then, of course, at the end of this game, they still have some 2-minute problems, so that needs to be resolved. But for the most part, good team doing good things. 17-point lead in the fourth quarter. That's a good place to be. You got to tighten up some gears. Make sure that you've got everything operating. But hey, it's just tough for me to complain too much about beating the Packers twice in a season. That's nice.
It's one of those where you feel right coming off of it because we are so predisposed to expect the worst thing to happen, and then it almost does, and we're very negative coming off of these, and then you sleep on it, and then you wake up and you go, oh, actually they played pretty good there and definitely deserved to win more than the Packers did. But I guess when it comes to, because this has now happened twice versus the Packers, happened against the Bears, it happened a little bit in other games where the Vikings have sprung out to these great leads, taken them deep into the second half, and then given up some kind of comeback effort. They've always fallen short. So why is it exactly the same is my question to you guys. Why is it that the other team can always come back, but then the second it gets back to within 1 score and it gets real, that's when the Vikings tighten down? Is there something specific you can pin that on, or is it more esoteric, Ron?
The Illuminati. I'm going to go with...
Okay. So a very concrete and real thing. Got it.
Right, of course.
Yeah, no. So honestly, I do feel like when teams get big leads, they tend to take the foot off the pedal, and that happens. That's nature sometimes. Now there are teams that when you're down, they're going to keep stomping you and putting you into the ground. But again, it's always, I say every game, there's a learning lesson to be learned. And this one is, we can't take our foot off the pedal. If I'm Brian Flores, if I'm Kevin O'Connell, and I'm like, hey, we have a big lead on the Lions, or we have a big, because they're starting out every game. But if you think about the early part, the first 10 games or something like that, they started out great in every game, just about. It felt like they were putting their foot on a lot of people's throats, or the first five for sure. I remember that. And this is what this team can do. They can score in bunches early. But what happens is the other team playing comeback football starts to get more aggressive. They start throwing the ball a little bit more. They start going after it a little bit more. So I think it's just the natural attrition of how the game is going and the score. But at the end of the day, the fact that they can tighten up, as you say, that's got to be good. Because imagine if we were sitting here talking about a 28-27. Vikings all of a sudden don't get it. Packers
and they collapse, and it finally happened. They've been exposed. Yeah.
Yep. Kick a field goal, then we got to listen to Peter Bukowski talk about how much of a fraud this team is, and so on and so forth. And honestly, what better game for Sam Darnold to put up 441 yards of offense against the Packers and Jordan Love struggled the way he struggled. When you look at, and even third downs, they were converting them, and the Packers still couldn't move the ball after that. So I love the fact that the way this played out, how everybody kept saying Sam Darnold's not better than Jordan Love. Sam Darnold's not an MVP caliber. He's not a Pro Bowl quarterback. You're lying to yourself if you say that. Like, you are literally just going with the national narrative of, oh, well, it's Sam Darnold and eventually the other shoe's going to drop. It hasn't dropped. He's gotten a guy in Kevin O'Connell that has done what we're seeing, which is unlock a great quarterback.
Yeah, we'll talk more about Darnold later, but Arif, what do you think about this weird comeback trend?
Yeah, I think some of it might just be the way that, offenses have to change the way that they call plays, what route concepts that they have put out there. And this is just speculation. I haven't really locked into looking at this in more detail. But my guess is something like that, where the offenses have a particular set of route concepts or combinations, the way that they call plays, the template that they use in those situations, in comeback situations where you have to throw the ball more, you're more likely to push the ball downfield, those kinds of things, and how it lines up against the Vikings defense. I think a lot of times when this is happening, I get a bunch of tweets that oh my God, the Vikings are in prevent defense. They shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. And that actually happening a lot less, I think, than people are saying. I don't think they're
it's drop eight. Defense. It's not prevent as you would call it, but it's their drop eight coverages, which have just been bad.
Exactly. And I think that the way that those drop eight coverages align against the most common route concepts that you see in these 2-minute offenses, I think it's just a bad mismatch for the Vikings, the way that those coverages and those routes combine with each other. I think that's probably it. I haven't tested this. I haven't looked at it too deeply, but I think that makes the most sense because of how consistently it happens, how it happens against every kind of team and every kind of offense. Certainly, the Vikings do need to lock in and focus in these moments. I think that that's part of it, but I think that structurally there's probably an issue here where when the Vikings are in this situation, that what they're attempting to do doesn't work. Because if you look at their drop eight stuff outside of 2-minute, it's killer. It's extremely good. So
it's when they can't disguise it with all the pre-snap stuff because the other offense is in a hurry, and then they just kind of have to play it straight up, and then you just have a 3-man rush, and those rushers are like Jonathan Bullard and Harrison Phillips, and it's they're just going to find somebody eventually in that zone coverage.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $500, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, do live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And you can go ahead and take a look at the second round of the college football playoff. Despite having already beaten Ohio State, Oregon are 2.5-point underdogs against the Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl. Penn State heads into the Fiesta Bowl favored by 10.5 points over Heisman runner-up Ashton Jeanty and the Boise State Broncos. Both teams are a combined 10-0 in the Fiesta. Despite the larger line, this should be a good one. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
You don't have to be the best team every week. You just have to be the better team.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
30-24 is the final score. The Washington Commanders pulling off an overtime victory, because what's better than primetime football overtime, primetime football, pulling out a victory in overtime. Jaden Daniels connecting with Zach Ertz for the game-winning touchdown at the end of it. And the first take from this game is that the Washington Commanders are in the playoffs. Like, at the end of the day, guys, that is ultimately the most important thing to take away from Week 17. And that doesn't mean we're going to ignore all of the things that happen with the slow start, the bad things, the turnovers, the penalties, the missed tackles, the bad blocking up front, the bad run fits up front. We're definitely going to talk about all that stuff. But if we're talking about the main takeaway from this game, it's that this team is in the playoffs. And I'll tell you right now, guys, we went down there to the locker room after the game. I sent out a video on Twitter. I got some of the guys coming off the field. I got managing partner Josh Harris coming off the field. Actually, the first person that I ran into after the game ended was Mitch Rales. He and I were both running downstairs to go see the guys coming off the field because we wanted to get into that celebration. Of course, I'm recording the celebration. Mitch Rales is part of the celebration, but he's the first person I was able to see. He's the first person whose hand I shook and congratulated him for everything they've been able to do for this team. It was a really cool moment, and that is kind of the essence of this thing, right? What's the purpose of playing this game? What's the purpose of coming out here, putting on the pads, going through the stress, going through the hours that the coaches work, going through the hours of film that the scouts are watching, going through all the negotiations, everything that Adam Peters and Lance Newmark and that front office going through? It's for moments like this. Now, ultimately, it's to hoist the Lombardi Trophy, right? That is the ultimate moment, but you got to fit these little moments on the way, and this is one of those moments. I got to talk to Dan Quinn before he hit the podium, on the live stream and everything else. I just congratulated. Nothing crazy, no off the record type of conversation, but I just congratulated him. I said, hard earned or well earned, hard fought, and he just went, yeah, man, it was. And he said that's what we expected, and that's exactly what they got. But the Washington Commanders, the thing that we're learning about this team, or that by now we should have fully learned and confirmed in our brains, is that it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be clean. But, man, the fight back that this team has is undeniable. The Washington Commanders, doesn't matter what is going on, doesn't matter how far down they are, doesn't matter how many things are going against them, how many crappy defensive penalties they draw, or how many crappy holding penalties they get called against them. At the end of the day, they have faith and belief in themselves. Dan Quinn said this not that long ago. Belief is an incredibly powerful thing. He was talking specifically about the belief that this team has in quarterback Jaden Daniels, but I'll extend that comment and that conversation to just the belief in themselves, the belief in the coaching staff, the belief that this team and this organization, this roster is capable of doing pretty much anything that they're going to go out there and set their minds to. And that is exactly what we saw on display again in this game. We've seen it multiple times over the course of the NFL season. Let's go back to our X factors. Every week we name some X factors, non-quarterback X factors, because obviously Jaden Daniels or the quarterback on either side of this matchup is going to be a huge factor into how this game unfolds. Let's talk about our non-quarterback X factors. Cornelius Lucas was my X factor for this game, coming in at right tackle, replacing Andrew Wiley, who was injured with a groin injury and unfortunately ends up suffering a groin injury of his own. But I will say, I think for the most part, and this is before I get to break down the tape, overall, the offensive line didn't have a great day. But I don't think Cornelius Lucas was a guy that you can look at and say, see, because he was in there, these bad things started to happen. Now, unfortunately, on the offensive line, during the course of the game, Tyler Biotish ended up getting rolled up on, injured his ankle, had to leave the game. Michael Dieter came in. And I wouldn't say right off the bat, but pretty close to right off the bat, there were some blown protection coverages, some blown slides. There was a rep where Brandon Coleman blocked inside, and you assume that is the call that he's been given, is you're going to block down the line of scrimmage. As he's blocking down, Matthew Judon is coming around the edge. Brandon Coleman doesn't see him in time because he's blocking down, unable to get out there, and Matthew Judon ends up blowing up Jaden Daniels with a big blindside hit. Those are things that you obviously want to get rid of. And again, the more experienced Tyler Biotish setting those protections, probably going to pick that up. But Michael Dieter coming in, doing the best that he can with what he's got. But so Cornelius Lucas, certainly part of a collective group of guys that are going to look back at the tape in this and want to say that they want to perform better from a pass protection standpoint, also from a run blocking standpoint. The insiders selected Frankie Louvu. Of course, his emotion, his energy, his impact as a leader on this team can never be understated. But from a stat box perspective, Frankie Louvu finishes this game with 1 tackle. That's his entire contribution to the stat box. Of course, again, you go back and watch the film, and you're going to see some opportunities where Frankie Louvu likely got in there in the mix. But the bottom line is, especially when you look at the first half, none of these players are going to walk out the first half and say, I did my part, I did everything I should have done, and nothing that went on in that first half that led us to going into the locker room down by 2 scores is going to be on my shoulders. I think every single person is going to have something to say that this was their fault. If there was one person who go into halftime and say, hey, I'm doing a good job, the rest of you need to catch up, it might be the guy who turned out to be arguably the most non-quarterback X factor of the game. And that's wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus. Wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus for the second week in a row showing up big time. Should have had 2 touchdown catches in this game. You can thank the NFL officiating for the lack of another one. And honestly, that second one probably would have ended the game. Not officially, but figuratively, the Atlanta Falcons would have been down 2 scores. So even if they continued to go down and score the touchdown they ended up scoring to tie the game, if they score that touchdown and Olamide Zaccheaus isn't robbed of his second score, that score doesn't tie the game. It just brings the Atlanta Falcons closer. Now they're in a onside kick situation, which, yes, it could get recovered, but typically they don't get recovered. And Larry Izzo is a pretty good special teams coordinator. I'm pretty confident that had the Atlanta Falcons been in an onside kick situation, that Larry Izzo's unit probably would have recovered that kick. But at the end of the day, guys, Olamide Zaccheaus finishes with 9 targets, 8 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. That one non-completion on the target was a drop. In my books, hit him right in the hands. Unfortunately, he also limped off the field after that. No official word, at least that I got. I wasn't able to attend every single conversation. So if there's an official word from somebody else, I haven't gotten that yet. But, of course, that's how information flows sometimes. But he did limp off the field. So I'm curious to see what, if anything, comes of that. Of course, Olamide Zaccheaus, again, 2 weeks in a row now, has been a big part of what this offense has been able to do. 3 touchdowns over the course of the last 2 weeks. And so ultimately he becomes kind of that isolated non-quarterback X factor. Of course, Zach Ertz could also be that guy. 7 targets, 6 catches, 72 yards, and 2 touchdowns, including the game winner. So I'll kind of give the non-quarterback X factors of this game. So Olamide Zaccheaus and Zach Ertz certainly contributing big time. Zach Ertz had a long catch of 37 yards. I know a lot of people have kind of, I don't know if call it criticism, but commented that Zach Ertz this season has been more of a catch and fall type of guy. Well, that 37-yarder, he didn't catch and fall. He caught, he turned, and he ran about as fast as his old self could run. And I'm older than him, so I get to say that. If you're younger than him, you don't get to call him old. So those are the non-quarterback X factors. We talk every week about the things that the Washington Mariners must do in order for me to guarantee you that the Washington Mariners will win. I'm going to tell you right now, they only did one of the 3 things this weekend, and that might be part of the reason why they didn't have as much success as perhaps we expected.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
At the very end, it took a turn.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast.
Let's dive into a crazy game. Another game that was on the end of the insanity that we've seen from this team all year against decent teams. The Bengals finally get a win against a team with a winning record in the Denver Broncos, but it takes overtime to do it after potential time mismanagement in crunch time. We're going to talk about that and so many other topics in this one, James, but what's your big takeaway as you reflect on this 30-24 win for the Bengals?
Wow. The big takeaway is Joe Burrow is as good as anyone on the planet, and you can decipher that however you want, but for them to continue to bounce back and bounce back and bounce back and overcome what seemingly was like 4 wins in one, like I give credit to Joe for being that stabilizing presence, and obviously he was awesome on the field. So I start there, but man, it's wild to think, but as we record this, it's Saturday night. It's December 28th. A lot of you will listen to this, watch this on December 29th. So we're literally talking about 4 weeks ago. They lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers, fall to 4-8. And we're not even thinking playoffs. Like, it was like, all right, well, should we start talking about the draft? We're looking at draft position, all of those things.
We were talking about, like, when do we bring Mock Draft Monday back? How much longer can we push that off? That was the question. Was like,
yeah.
Like, can we push this off just a little bit longer? We're not ready for it yet.
Yeah, and now, and I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. I haven't even looked at the percentage chances and all of those things, but there is a chance, and they've played their way into a meaningful Week 18 game, and the defense has showed some signs today. Not all good, certainly, which is why it was so wacky, but some good. And the offense continues to be a lot of fun to watch, and yet there's things that they could certainly improve on, especially in the first half when this game could have gotten away from the Broncos. But for them to find a way to win this game, really move the ball up and down the field against a good defense in the Broncos and what I think is a tough matchup, I just wild. And honestly, I just come back to where I led it. You said, what's your big takeaway? Well, Joe Burrow was 39 of 49. That's a 79.6% completion percentage for 412 yards, was sacked 7 times, still had 3 touchdowns, had a 122.1 quarterback rating, also ran for a touchdown and 25 yards. Joe Burrow is he might not be the MVP in real life when the MVP votes are cast, but I don't know how you can argue that he isn't as valuable or more valuable than anyone in the league for what this Bengals team is, what they've done. And now we're looking at a team that has 8 wins, not 4 wins. So where would the Bengals be without Joe Burrow? They'd be contending for that number 1 overall pick is what I think that's where they would be.
What Joe Burrow has done this year, most years wins the MVP, especially when you take into context the team around him, the difficulties that they've had in various departments of this team, the plays they haven't made on either side of the ball, or the offensive line issues they've had. Whatever you want to throw in there as caveats, just amplify his case if you were to make one. It's just an award that is generally given to the best player on a team that is solidly a playoff team. And so he certainly faces an uphill battle there. He'll probably get votes. There are enough people out there that think he's playing at that level that he'll probably get votes, but it still feels like an incredible long shot. Like very, very long odds. But your point,
and the reason it should, I'm not trying to be too homerish here, but the word is valuable, not best player on the best team or the number 2 seed or the this or the, like, it's not even like watching this in when you understand that word. And if you voted that way, then he's got to be in easily the top 3. Like there's no running back that you're voting for. And it would be Allen, Lamar, and Joe. I mean, those are the 3 guys. And after that, whatever. But Joe was awesome tonight. And the Bengals, he thinks they have the best offense in the NFL. And if they do, it's because Joey B is at quarterback.
The Denver defense is really good.
Yeah.
We talked about that coming into this game and talked about Riley Moss. And boy, are we going to talk about Riley Moss later in the show a little bit too. But the Bengals in this game went 11 plays, 48 yards, went 17 plays, 68 yards, went 7 plays, 62 yards, went 11 plays, 69 yards, 11 plays, 63 yards, 6 plays, 27 yards. That one ended in a fumble after what should have been a first down conversion. 6 plays, 59 yards. Their first punt of the game comes in overtime, 5 plays, 17 yards. They finally have to punt the ball. Joe Burrow has another game-winning drive, which would have been his second of the game, because you could argue that the touchdown to take the Bengals to be up 7 points toward the end of regulation, and we'll talk about the time management there. Certainly 24-17 is a game-winning drive, a fourth quarter game-winning drive potentially if the defense can get a stop. And then he takes the Bengals down to the 15. Is that right? 14, 15-yard line. And Cade York misses a field goal on third down right before
15.
Right before that missed kick. When they run the ball on second down, I tweeted, man, I wish they had gone for a touchdown here. Still wish they would have gone for the touchdown there, but the defense gets them the ball back in another 5 plays, 63-yard drive for a touchdown. The Bengals were stopped on turnover on downs twice in the first half. Very easy to argue that those were self-inflicted issues. Their play calling issues, I think, on the first one, trying to run the ball a couple of times there. The second one in particular got me riled up a little bit. And then on the next drive, you have the either misfire from Joe Burrow to Mike Gesicki. Is that this drive? Am I talking about the right drive here? Yeah, it's either the misfire to Mike Gesicki that ends up incomplete right around the goal line, or Mike Gesicki runs that route a little too deep. Hard to know on that one without being in the room. Chase Brown getting blown up in the backfield, Jamar Chase dropping a touchdown, and then Joe Burrow taking a sack. And outside of that, the Bengals were moving the ball up and down the field against a really good Broncos defense, despite the 7 sacks. And he actually was sacked 2 more times, I think, that were erased by penalties. I believe there were up to 9 in this game. They lose Amarius Mims, who's trying to play through a broken hand, wearing a cast. And he doesn't come back into the game. Devin Cochran actually playing pretty admirably at right tackle. But overall on the day, if you had told me the offense would look like this against this defense, I would have assumed they were going away with this one. The offense was good in this game. They had a few issues that were self-inflicted issues, a fumble for T. Higgins, another one of those. But boy, did T answer the call when he had to make up for it. T. Higgins finishes this game in emphatic style with an incredible catch, the game-winning touchdown, 11 catches, 131, 3 touchdowns. After a false start, after a fumble, facing down a couple of mistakes in adversity and answering by putting the team on his back and making incredible plays to help the Bengals win the game.
Yep. It's T time. I mean, I think he's been so good this year just in general, but for him to play the way he played tonight, and I'm just looking here so even with the fumble in PPR leagues, I was just curious, 40 fantasy points in this championship game. T. Higgins clutch if you have him on your team, and if you're going against him, I'm sorry. He's just that damn good. Like he matters so much in games like this when there's a Patrick Surtain and in a guy, an elite corner or an elite defense that has the ability to keep Joe Burrow in the pocket and not extend plays as much, and also can take away Jamar at times. Well, then you have T. And I think if you're going to be this pass-heavy offense, which the Bengals are, that's their identity, right? It's why we've talked so much about receivers, and that's why T is a need. When Joe said that less than a month ago, but after a few days after that Dallas win, the Bengals are 5-8, and he's on a limb talking about T. This is why, because he can do that. He can be this kind of difference maker in this game. T. Higgins now 10 touchdowns on the season. That's a career high. His previous career high was 7, so he had already tied that. Has played in 11 regular season games, has 10 touchdowns. I mean, he matters, and he obviously mattered tonight. And in crunch time, it's funny, I was talking to him after the game. So he catches that 31-yarder that set up the game-winning touchdown in overtime, and he was like, I was cooked. I had just run like 4 or 5 go routes. I was cooked. And I'm like, well, Cook T can get 2 feet down still. I mean, the fact that he was able to get both feet down on that catch, make that play, the strong hands that we saw really throughout the game from him outside of the fumble, just a heck of a performance. I mean, he was the Broncos, and I would say like 25 other teams would be like, yeah, that's our wide receiver 1. And having him alongside Jamar Chase, what a weapon. So hopefully this is not T. Higgins' last home game at Paycor Stadium. Hopefully this is just a big fireworks show and a gotta have it game and part of his legacy as a Bengal.
Makes a statement to the Bengals that is the importance of T. Higgins. If it is his final game in Paycor Stadium, what a way to go out. At least there will be that. That is a slim silver lining. I think more than anything, it sends a very powerful message to the front office. And as we've talked about, who else are you paying? And the agent change and all the stuff we've talked about with T. Higgins, a huge game for him. And the
rocket money, Jake, it's going to help.
Yeah, got to save the Bengals some money on those subscriptions. The other note on T that I wanted to hit was the other touchdown catch. That wasn't the slant. That one's just easy. That's just a great play call there. They've been struggling in the red zone. So to get to that play call in that spot, get T in motion and get him singled up in that spot, there's nobody that is handling T. Higgins on that Denver side of the field besides maybe Patrick Surtain on a slant from like the 1 or 2 yard line or whatever it was. That's just too easy for Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. As soon as Joe catches a snap, he knows where that ball is going. So that's a great play call. Credit Zach Taylor for getting T in motion, singling him up. Just a little slant flat combo there. The late hands on the second touchdown that the broadcast did a good job of pointing out. Trent Green did a great job of pointing this out. Valley Moss is in great position there. Joe Burrow throws a great ball, but Riley Moss is in a good spot. T. Higgins' late hands technique, flashing those hands when the ball is practically above Riley Moss's head. He has no idea where the ball is. He's guessing. You can watch the replay. The hand he throws out there to try to break up the pass is nowhere close. And that's just perfectly played by T. Higgins in that spot. Huge play there. And man, for all the talk about Riley Moss, between Dan Orlovsky's tweet, between our crossover this week, the Bengals went after Riley Moss. He was targeted 13 times, according to PFF charting in this game, James. He gave up 9 catches on those 13 targets for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaquan McMillan, the second most targeted corner for Denver, just in case you were curious, 9 catches on 9 targets for 99 yards and a touchdown. So not so good for McMillan or Moss in this game.
Yeah, honestly, that shows what T. Higgins, that shows what these guys are. That right there. Because you had really smart football people saying Riley Moss could be a difference maker, right? And that he's going to help change the Broncos. And by the way, he's a big part of their defense. I think he's a talented corner, and he's probably going to be really good next week in Kansas City, or against Kansas City at the games in Denver. But that's why you have Jamar and T, because it's so tough. And then when you have the answer for those two guys, then you have the Mike Gesicki, then you have the Andre Yosevach. And I think that's part of what kind of was I don't want to say cheat code, because I don't think anything was easy for Joe. But when you have a guy like Mike Gesicki that has the size, athleticism, length, and just ability to find the ball and get open, and he only averaged 8.6 yards per catch. His long catch was 12 yards. But this is that slot. You're talking about the biggest slot in the league with Mike Gesicki. And I know he's listed as a tight end, but 10 receptions, a season high, for 86 yards on 12 targets. And heck, it would have been 11, but the one target, it was tipped. And so it just disrupted Gesicki's concentration. Like, yeah, I think that's what makes it hard. It's because in a game like this, when it's like, all right, well, I'm sure the Broncos felt like they had an answer, at least for Jamar. But then there's T. And then when you had the answer for T, well, then there's Mike Gesicki. And then there's Andre Yosevach. And it makes it tough to guard, again, what Joe Burrow said is the best offense in the league.
Yeah, Gesicki had a couple of mistakes in this game. Don't want to belabor the point there. He was awesome in this game. Like you said, he caught 10 of 12 targets, huge first downs. He had 5 first downs in this game, was the reliable third possession receiver type the Bengals needed, and we're picking on the mismatch. I mean, there was a point in this game, early in this game, that tight ends for the Bengals, Cam Grandy had the first target of the game. Drew Sample had an early target. Mike Gesicki had 3 early targets. It was 6 targets for tight ends and 3 targets for Jamar Chase, and that was all of the 9 first throws for Joe Burrow in this game before the ball started to go to T. Higgins a little bit more, Jamar Chase a little bit more. 16 targets for Jamar, by the way. 10 catches, 112 yards. Dropped his touchdown chance. Unfortunate there, but should be pretty comfortable in building his Triple Crown lead there. We'll need probably a little bit more next week on the yardage front with Justin Jefferson a little bit close. But in a game where everyone had mistakes, they also all made big plays. Yoshi had a drop. It might have been on the OPI play. So there's OPI there. That's a Chase Brown OPI issue. But Chase Brown had his share of plays in this game. Unfortunate injury for him. Jamar obviously put the Bengals in position a number of times with his own big plays, especially in the fourth quarter, but had a drop. Mike Gesicki had the drop, but also had all those first downs. He also had the illegal motion that erases an Andre Yosevach touchdown. The Bengals managed to overcome that one with Joe Burrow picking up a first down on a 3rd and 13 scramble. But all these mistakes happen, but all these guys are also making plays that were more than enough to make up for it. And that is a difference this week